Okay, Chapter 1 Fairy Folk. Just diving right in. I was standing in a strange room that felt like it should be familiar. Yet the furniture, the items, they were all foreign, strange. This is not how I was expecting this to start. Across the room was a door that I headed toward instinctively, my bare feet padding silently on the carpet. Beyond that door was home. A home I desperately wanted to reach. A home filled with the tingling smell of rain and moss, with little sound but the soft rustle of trees in the wind. I exited the claustrophobic room, passing from one shadowy place to another uninterrupted. My vision was strangely distorted, like looking down a long tunnel through broken and dusty windows. It occurred to me somewhere at the back of mind that this was a dream. Even so, I continued. I reached the bottom of a series of steps, my feet coming to a stop on a cold floor. Too many foggy thoughts crowded my head. In my ears was a strange muttering voice whose words I couldn't make out. Have to leave. I had to leave, but I wasn't sure which way to go. I was gonna say, I'm curious, are we seeing this from Rule's perspective or Nora's? But if it's a dream, then it wouldn't be Rule's thoughts, it would be Nora's. But I'm having, like, some influence on what we're doing. So if we choose... I guess the closest door is probably the back, and the front would be the furthest? What does this do for me? Okay, I don't know if this matters, but I'm gonna flip a coin anyway and see. Okay, heads, we are gonna go to the door closest to us, and tails, we're gonna go the furthest. Hiya! Heads. Okay. Closest. The door closest to me. That was the way I had to go. It was the one that led where I needed to go, wherever that was. If it is the back door, that leads to the woods, which would be closer than the front door. My hand closed on the door handle, and I let myself out into the cool night air. Yep, back door. Man, it is so hard to see anything. From far away came the lonesome call of an owl as I shambled through the freezing grass. Oh, hi, Mark. My feet moved almost of their own accord. Even if I wanted to turn back, I wasn't sure I could. So hard to think. My mind wanted to nod off and let my body just go where it wanted. In the part of my mind still vaguely conscious of where I was going, I realized I had paused at the edge of the fairy ring. I stared down at it curiously. It felt so far away, like looking through the wrong end of a telescope, like I was watching from somewhere outside my body. New mushrooms had already sprouted to replace the ones that had been ruined, but the latter were still there too. Delicate domes crushed and left as food for worms. Spencer. I was almost startled when I spoke his name. My voice was strange, raspy and weird. I didn't sound at all like myself, and yet it was still somehow familiar. Interesting. I like that Rule looked at him and was just like, Spencer. But Spencer was unimportant now. I had somewhere I needed to go. I was barely aware of letting myself out the gate. My feet carried me down the path to the trees, but it was as if someone else was pulling me there. If I could make it to the sanctity of the trees, then I would... What? What would I do? Nora? This time the voice wasn't mine. It was... familiar, but...
Nora!
I know that voice.
Nora, stop!
I tried to answer, but my mouth wouldn't work properly. and my feet moved forward even as I tried to make them stop. Cold. That wasn't really what I'd been trying to say, but it was the first word that came out. Reality seeped back in, and suddenly the hold the dream had on me just snapped. And I was back. It was so cold, and I was standing just at the tree line staring into the dark. A warm arm closed around my shoulders.
Are you okay? I thought you might be sleepwalking or something, but I guess you wouldn't really know if you were.
Elliot. I wondered, I'm like, it's either Elliot or Danny, most likely. If Ewan was here right from the beginning, I'd be super sus.
So you recognize me now?
I nodded, trying to pull away. But he was warm and holding me upright because my legs weren't quite sure if they wanted to hold me up or not. Man, he moved in quick.
You okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Come on, let's get you back home.
I didn't argue with him, my brain still trying to shake off the fog from that little sleepwalking adventure. Outside. Elliot helped me back up to the gate, and now that I was awake, I realized my feet were numb with cold. The legs of my pajamas were soaked as well. He took this very in stride. Elliot stopped just outside the backyard.
You'll be okay from here?
Yeah. To my surprise, he didn't question me further about what happened, but I could tell he was concerned. This is in line with his route, where he didn't really ask the night of, but later he's like, you know, that was kind of strange. I mean, obviously, I'd been sleepwalking my way into the forest at night. Definitely concerning behavior there. Ugh. I tried to give him a reassuring smile. I'll be fine. Thanks. Even though I said that, he waited by the gate until I was safely back inside. Thanks, old boo. I took a moment to clean myself up and remove all evidence that I'd gone out, wiping up the dirty footprints I'd left behind. Then I made sure to shove the paper towels deep in the bin, hiding them from view, because Mom definitely would have noticed them otherwise. It felt like forever before I finally managed to stagger upstairs and back into my room where I could really analyze what had happened. Not that there was much to analyze. I'd tried to go out to the woods. Again. The end. As I changed into a fresh pair of pajamas, I tried to remember the dream I'd been having, but it was already fading. All I could recall was the feeling of trying to get somewhere important. The real concern was the sleepwalking itself. It was becoming a serious issue. If Elliot hadn't stopped me, who knows where I'd have ended up this time. I pulled the blankets over my head and snuggled down. I needed to find out what was going on. And fast. I definitely couldn't let myself keep doing this. I was so tired. Sitting on the edge of my bed, rubbing my eyes as if that would somehow help me wake up wasn't, helping. It felt like I hadn't gotten any sleep at all. That stupid sleepwalking thing was really taking it out of me. And dealing with it was the last thing I needed, given how complicated the rest of my life had gotten over the last week. It didn't feel like a week should be able to make that much difference, but it did. Oh man, did it ever. Though not for want of trying to keep things simple. Trying and failing. Horribly. But that was another thing entirely. Or is it? The sleepwalking could be connected to everything else. How was I even supposed to know? Man, she's having the deep thoughts super duper early, which I'm a fan of. With a groan, I staggered out of bed and went to pick an outfit, then to go wash my face. I'd been trying so hard to keep the supernatural from bleeding into my home life as much as I could, but this sleepwalking thing wasn't making it easy. I was a bit paranoid about it, to be honest. There was some kind of paranormal secrecy act in place, which Allie had mentioned last week, that literally made it illegal to talk to normal people about the magic community. In most situations, anyway. The rules were nebulous, and while they did allow for accidental exposures, I'd been very strongly warned about being careless. The main issue was that I was, supposedly, a legitimately magic race, so telling my family about it was out of the question. The fact that magic was involved made all the difference in terms of how dangerous it could be. Not just magic, but fairy magic at that. Though to be fair, I couldn't say with certainty whether the sleepwalking was paranormal in the first place, much less magical, so it might be a moot point. I was still hesitant to talk to Mom about it though, because while it didn't feel like a normal sleep disorder, and honestly, even without laws in place, I doubted my parents would believe me if I told them my inner fairy was making me go frolic in the woods at night. If I was still questioning the whole fairy thing, I could only imagine they'd probably have my brain scanned to figure out if I'd gone nuts. And that was just my parents. Spencer was an entirely different problem. I pulled my clothes on wearily. All the efforts to keep the stuff away from home, and here I am causing problems with something as stupid as sleepwalking. I'd so desperately wanted just one part of my life to remain normal. One thing. Though I guess I couldn't really take all the blame myself. My sleepwalking was definitely not the only weird thing going on at home. Cue the brownie. There was also that thing to contend with. Hi, Brownie. It's gonna be our last time with you. I scowled as I sat at the island, cupping my hands around a coffee mug, side-eyeing the little brown creature taking a bath in the kitchen sink. Or maybe it was going for a swim. I tilted my head as I watched. Nope, definitely a bath. Ew. I watched it pick up a sponge and start scrubbing itself. I mean, it is a good size for a bath for a brownie. That cannot be sanitary. And how did no one else notice that? Even if they couldn't see the creature, surely they'd at least see a levitating sponge or something. And seriously, did fairies just not have a sense of modesty at all? Because it seemed to have no problem with me watching it scrub its backside. Not that I wanted to watch it exactly. Ahem. I looked away, wrinkling my nose, and wondering how safe it was to drink my coffee. Nora? I started at the unexpected intrusion, almost falling off my seat. Are you speaking to me of your own free will? Oh, jeez! Didn't notice him come in. Seeing me nearly faceplant on the floor amused my friend in the sink because it fell out with a splat. I could hear its creaky giggling behind the island. Rude. Why are you so jumpy lately? Just didn't sleep well. What do you want? Spencer gave me a long look. I was saying, did you want to lift to school today? What do you want? I raised an eyebrow. Things are moving too quickly. Mr. I'm ditching you was offering me a ride? Really? Come to think of it, he looks really tired. Adrian, you better not be around here anymore. Maybe his afternoon job was harder than he expected. Not to mention that things at home had been rocky, to say the least. Not my fault, though. That stupid brown thing, a household spirit as Allie called it, had taken a strong dislike to Spencer. They were supposed to be helpful, but if you made them mad, they could be a major nuisance. And Spencer had made this one mad. I sipped at my coffee carefully as I studied the dark circles under Spencer's eyes. Allie's driving me, as usual. I had no idea what he was up to. Frankly, it was better for both of us if I didn't ride with him. Considering I was taking the blame for the household spirit shredding his homework, and hiding his keys, and stealing his shoes. Suit yourself. I will, thanks. He seemed weirdly disappointed, but surely he couldn't be that shocked I preferred to ride with, well, anyone but him. Spencer paused in the door, glancing back at me. Do you spend time with anyone not in that club anymore? It hasn't even been a week, but it's like that's all you even do these days. Spend time there with the other members somewhere else. Okay. What has the club got to do with anything? You know, people say a lot of weird things about it. And some of the people in it, too. Is there a point to this?
I just think it's interesting that's the club you chose to join.
I joined it because Allie is in it, and she has to drive me home every day because you can't be trusted. He scowled as I grabbed my things, but I just rolled my eyes at the mock outrage. He'd picked the fight, not me. Glare all you want. I wasn't the one who left you at school, was I? I left him in the kitchen and started outside. I had no idea why he constantly had to poke at me about stupid stuff like that. I wasn't a fan of the bickering. I would assume he wasn't either. But he sure seemed to like picking fights. Okay, he's being super aggro this route. I nearly made it to the driveway when he grabbed me by the arm. What do you want, Spencer?
You know I found the keys in the fridge this morning.
I didn't know, but congrats, I guess. That stupid brown thing.
And my homework is still missing.
You're struggling with the concept of making a point more than usual today.
I know it's you!
It's not me, as I've told you several times already. I mean, not that I had proof or anything, so it wasn't as if I couldn't understand why he was blaming me, and I couldn't exactly tell him it was the household spirit. Stupid fairies. I yanked my arm free and stepped away from him. Until you actually catch me in the act of supposedly stealing your stuff, maybe you should keep your accusations to yourself.
I will catch you.
Well, good luck with that. I turned on my heel and stalked down the driveway. I heard Spencer slam the front door a few seconds later. As soon as he was gone, I let my shoulders droop as I rubbed at my eyes. I still don't understand why he wanted us to go for a ride with him, though. That's super... And then after that, he was just, like, laid into us with all the accusations, as per usual. Super sus about all of this. Stupid brother. He was lucky I was too tired to really get mad at him. If the sleepwalking didn't end up being the death of me, Spencer and that stupid fairy would be. I hated that Spencer blamed me. Even more than that, I hated that I completely understood why he did. He was hardly going to assume Mom and Dad were doing it. I was the only logical choice. Why is that stupid fairy so mad at him anyway? I still hadn't even worked out that much. Not that it mattered why. Whatever the reason, it was mad at him, and it was making both our lives miserable because of it. Did we just walk out while we were waiting for Allie? Or is this our view? Given everything else going on in my life at the moment, it was a little side drama I really didn't need. Okay, I'm going for a walk. But I was so absorbed thinking about it, I was nearly all the way down to the bridge before I realized I hadn't actually told Allie I'd meet her elsewhere. She'd probably show up at the house soon and wonder where I was. Okay. Oops. Well, I'm already here anyway. I'll send her a text in a minute. She had to come this way anyway to get to school, so it's not like it was out of the way. I find it interesting that you've come back to this bridge scarcely a week after the Spriggan incident, and you're just like, ah, it's so nice here. The bridge was beautiful as always, covered with a canopy of leaves above, dappled with light below. I passed over it every day, but hadn't actually walked down since the incident with the Spriggan, at least in part because Allie had told me not to. I'd wanted to, though. I couldn't pinpoint why, since there was nothing down there anymore. I just felt a weird pull. It was strange how being down there caused this strange nostalgia to creep over me, though I'd never been to this neighborhood before we moved in. It's one of those... not gate... Is it a gate? But you know, like those points where reality shifts between the Fae world and... or Ghost world and our world. I can't remember what the term is. We'll probably get it in our journal again. Actually, speaking of journal... Yeah, I'm like, we should have some stuff about you in now. Dullahans are a type of fairy associated with the Unseelie court. Though folklore mostly references a single Dullahan, there is actually not just one. Dullahans are headless riders, at least in the sense that their heads can come off. There are many different variations of this particular fae, but the general idea is that when they stop riding, someone dies. There is a story of one headless rider whose name was EWAN, but I guess it's not the same one. EWAN is a guy I go to school with, who happens to be a headless rider, except he can't quite control when his head detaches. It definitely makes for some awkward moments. Also, he doesn't ride a horse but a motorcycle. I don't know if it's coincidence or if he has some compulsion to, ride something. And since it would be weird to ride a horse to school, well, there you go. Fairies are a diverse group of demi-human creatures from a realm that bears the same name. There are many legends about where fairies came from exactly, but most suggest that they are far older than humans and have deep connections to the natural world. Some of the stronger ones are considered to be immortal as well. Even so, they seem to have a strange fascination with humans and human society. Spriggans are a well-known type of fairy, often associated with the Unseelie court. Basically, the bad guys. Spriggans are ugly, unpleasant, and hot-headed. They have associated with goblins and trolls and are used by other fairies as bodyguards. Though they're usually small, they have the ability to swell their bodies up to enormous sizes, though it's unclear if their size is actually changing or it's just a trick of fairy glamour. Changelings, a type of fairy that is left in the care of humans at a very young age, usually without the knowledge of the humans, as the changeling usually replaces their own child, which is stolen away by the fairies. Lore varies on what exactly the fae leave behind when they steal a human baby. It can be anything from a fairy baby, to an older sick fairy, to a log disguised with glamour. In the instance of logs and other fakes, they usually seem to sicken and die of natural causes over time. Okay, is that everything we've got so far? Yes. Okay. I paused briefly when I set foot on the edge, wondering why I had even come down here again. I glanced behind me, but Allie's car wasn't in sight. So a little peek couldn't hurt, right? Just a quiet, whatever strange impulse was pushing me to come back here. Okay, so we're gonna be, constantly in trouble this route. Delightful. Leaving my school bag beside the road, I carefully slid my way down the embankment. If Allie came this way before I texted, she'd see my bag and stop. And freak out on you. As she should. I grimaced as my boots sank into the mud down by the water. Recent rains had swelled the creek. It was still quite shallow, but I definitely didn't want to fall in. I found a mostly solid patch of ground at the bottom where I could safely look around. And found myself unexpectedly facing off with the deep shadows lurking under the bridge. And suddenly I didn't think I wanted to be there anymore. It was just a normal bridge, and yet something felt off as I peered under it and through to the other side. Wiggly, vague shapes seemed to waft from the shadows, and the heavy, wet smell of soil and trees reminded me of my sleepwalking. That smell always permeated my dreams and left a feeling of disquiet deep in the pit of my stomach. I backed away, deciding that I'd seen it, and I could go now. There was no Spriggan, no evidence it had ever been there, and I had seen everything I wanted to see. As I climbed back up the embankment, I felt strangely jittery. I just really wanted to leave. I wasn't quite to the top when I saw the familiar figure on a motorbike coming up the road toward me. Oh, thank goodness, my savior. He slowed as he approached, then came to a stop a few feet past where I was standing. He propped the bike and carefully pulled off his helmet. I waved sheepishly, not really having expected to see Ewan this morning. He gave a long look where I stood halfway down the embankment. Amusingly, he looked even taller from this angle, like a disapproving giant glaring down at me.
Nora? What are you doing down there?
Well... I glanced back down to the creek. Nothing much. I had a fight with my brother and sort of flounced my way here without realizing, and, I shrugged helplessly. I didn't know how to explain it. I just wanted to take a look, that was all. Ewan shook his head and inched his way partially down the embankment before extending a hand. How gallant.
Here, come on, let's get you out of there.
I reached up gratefully and pulled myself higher, my feet sliding on the wet grass and leaves. Going down had definitely been easier. Ewan had no trouble pulling me back up to the road. He released me as soon as I was at the top, and I scraped the mud from my boots on the edge of the asphalt. Definitely not the best plan to climb down in these boots. At least they were nicely waterproof.
Here.
He handed me my book bag, which I slung over my shoulder, and then we just stood there. Awkwardly. Silently. Thanks. For stopping to help. I mean, you know.
I thought you managed to tumble down into the creek somehow.
I'm not that clumsy.
Well, given your skills dismounting my bike the other day, I wasn't sure.
This has nothing to do with that. The only way I'd tumble into the creek is if I took a deliberate swan dive off the bridge. He smirked slightly. And then the awkward silence was back. Jeez, why was it so hard to talk to him sometimes? And where the heck was Allie? So, how's school? Ewan raised an eyebrow at that query.
Okay, I guess. When I'm not rescuing classmates from ditches.
Ha ha ha. That was hardly a rescue. And it's not exactly a ditch either.
Ah, my mistake. Maybe you'd like to go back down and climb out by yourself then?
Well, that just seems like a waste of energy. I shot him a sidelong look. We haven't really talked much since that day in the library. I still found him to be kind of an enigma. Standoffish at times, flat-out rude others, strangely nice at others. There was also definitely a sense of humor in there, but it seemed like it was reluctant to surface sometimes. I studied his profile silently and soon found myself staring at that collar he always wore. I wondered... fashion statement? Or... I thought about that old urban legend with a little girl that wore the ribbon around her neck to keep her head on. That had always struck me as weird, even as a kid. Didn't seem like a ribbon would quite do the trick. What if it was a magic ribbon? That heavy leather collar probably helps anyway. Man, that's actually made of leather? Whew, that's awesome. I wonder how the whole head thing works anyway. How does it actually detach and reattach? Ugh, or maybe I really didn't want to know. I realized suddenly that Ewan was staring back at me. Shoot! I quickly looked away, flushing slightly. Hadn't meant to stare like that. I sneaked another look at him, but his expression had closed off, and it felt like a wall suddenly went up between us. We needed a distraction. Or maybe I should just head back home and wait for Allie there. Spend time with your boo. You gotta break down those walls if you're gonna smooch him. Oh! Look at that! I pointed vaguely over Ewan's shoulder as if I'd maybe been looking that way the entire time. Because the old look at that trick always works so well in movies and cartoons. Yes, I was a brilliant strategist indeed. I mentally kicked myself. It might be time to just remove myself from society for the greater good and become a hermit in the mountains for the rest of my life. Ewan lifted an eyebrow and cautiously looked where I'd pointed.
And what exactly am I looking at?
I frantically looked for something, anything that might look vaguely interesting, so of course there was nothing. That tree! Isn't it pretty? She says, in a location where they are surrounded by trees. That all look the same. Really, Nora, you are a genius. Ewan gave me a dubious look, as he should.
Well, it looks like a tree.
It's a pretty tree. Look how bright the leaves are.
All the trees over there look exactly the same.
Hush up, you. Hey, I spent the last 5 years in a place that barely had trees. I'm just glad to be back somewhere I can actually enjoy fall. There's greenery here, it's nice.
That tree isn't green.
Yeah, well, orangery sounds weird, and I'm pretty sure it's not a thing. That awkward wall crumbled slightly, and Ewan's half-smirk was back. I will count that as a success.
Fair enough.
I was relieved, and I made a mental note to not stare at him anymore. Given his issue, and the fact I'd already fainted once, I didn't want to stir up awkwardness between us, not when he was one of the only other fairies I knew. There was a short blare of a car horn just as a car crested the top of the hill and came toward us. It was Allie. Well, it looks like my ride's here. Thanks for the daring rescue earlier. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Look, I don't know what you were doing down there, but for the record, you need to be more careful.
Yeah, walking down an embankment to a shallow stream is truly not for the faint of heart.
You probably thought that the first time you did it too. And that time a Spriggan tried to drag you off into the trees.
This time there wasn't a Spriggan.
Lucky for you.
Yes. Also lucky for me that a cranky Dullahan stopped his gallant steed long enough to rescue me from the evil clutches of air. Oh, that is a line. I mean, a knight in semi-shiny leather isn't quite on par with a knight in shining armor, but I mean, I shrugged. Some of the tension eased out of his shoulders at the gentle teasing. I'm glad he took it as such and didn't get offended.
Cute.
It's a gift. I gave him a hopeful smile that he didn't return as he instead popped his helmet back on.
See you later then.
He jumped back on his bike and revved the engine, driving off just as Allie pulled to a stop. I watched him go before joining her in her car. It's interesting. I wonder why he stayed with us that long. He could have just left after helping us. He's a mysterious boy. I still don't... He's an enigma, as Nora says, quite eloquently. I don't know what to do with him yet.